We're live, Naomi.
Think we are live.
So I welcome you. Who's going to be? We don't really have leaders and followers in our little world.
I mean, this is an anarchic community here, so we did not ordain any higher power with those sorts of privileges.
Should I introduce you and you introduce me?
Sure, sounds wonderful. Well, I'm here with the wonderful Jeffrey Tucker, who needs absolutely no introduction because he's incredible. You guys, I'm sure you've all read his latest piece about the Ross Ulbricht sentencing, which is why we're here tonight to talk about that. So, Jeffrey, your words are just beautiful, and they really sum up the humongous issue that we're facing right now, which is the people against the government. That's essentially what this is. I will let you go ahead and introduce me.
No, I just want to note the fact that you chose to go first, even though we didn't really have a democratic election.
Spontaneous order. That's
okay. Spontaneous leadership, right? So I'm here with the beautiful and impossibly charming Naomi Brockwell, who's at the Moving Picture Institute, and yourself, a wonderful personality and intellectual force. And I think that you've had a very special interest in the Ross Ulbricht case. Didn't you actually? Were you involved in the trial at any level? Did you attend?
Yeah. So I was at the sentencing the other day, and it was unbelievably traumatic for everyone there. And I know that everyone has really felt the pain of this whole issue because we're just seeing the defense be handicapped at every stage of this trial. And then the sentencing really brought home to me the humongous problem that we're facing right now. Being there in the courtroom when the sentence was pronounced, it was unbelievable. So the courtroom was packed, and then they had two overflow rooms as well, two separate rooms that were filled with people. I was in one of the overflow rooms for the first part, and through the whole thing, like everything the judge was saying, there were just audible gasps through the whole way through. And then for the actual sentencing, I was in the courtroom, and I mean, we'll get into all of what happened at the sentencing in a second, but I just wanted to say my heart goes out for the entire Ulbricht family. This was a horrendous miscarriage of justice that we all witnessed on Friday. So.
I had some, it's been a tough several days for all of us, I think, at many levels in many ways. I think you experienced the trauma about as closely as anybody could. I obviously wasn't there, but it's kept me up at night. I can't seem to find the right words. I found myself only able to take the news in little small doses. I didn't read Ross's letter to the judge until today, actually, because I just sometimes I avoid things I don't want to look at, and that's sort of how I felt about that. And I found it to be a beautifully touching and inspiring, beautiful, extraordinary.
Yeah. So let's start with the judge's impression of that letter, where she basically called it a horrible display of arrogance. I have so many things that I want to say about this judge. Like, my goodness, Ross is standing there in front of her begging for his life, and in tears, absolutely distraught because he knows what's ahead of him. And I have never witnessed anything as vicious as what I saw in the judge in addressing Ross, really? Talking about this letter that he wrote, how arrogant he is, how he clearly holds himself above the law, how he clearly has no regard for other people, how he's this callous, malicious person. There were all these ad hominem attacks. What was worse than the ad hominem attacks, though, was a judge using uncharged crimes when determining what sort of a sentence to give someone. And that's really what it comes down to. The fact that Ross has never been indicted for any murder charge. And you cannot use information that is not brought to trial, that clearly they did not have enough evidence to bring to trial because the two leading investigators in this whole case were incredibly corrupt, and so no evidence probably exists for this, and the fact that she used that in describing in creating the sentence, it was beyond me. I mean, it started off, I feel like the murmurs in the crowd really started when she started reading through some of the things that he did, right? It started when she started talking about how many drugs passed through Silk Road, and then when she said that he was was being directly linked to all of these, she was counting it as if he had directly sold all of these drugs.
Do you think she understood that wasn't true? I mean,
God. I think, you know what, I think she understood exactly what she was doing, and I think that there were some really underhanded things going on with this. And the reason I say that is because at every stage of the trial, the defense were handicapped. You know, the fact that a week before trial, the defense had thousands and thousands and thousands of extra pages popped on their desk that the prosecution was going to take to court. They had like such limited time to go through it all. The fact that they tried to bring in expert witnesses to actually describe the technology and why multiple moderators could have had access at any time to all of these things, and how you couldn't actually link a single person to any of these things. I mean, they denied their request for any of these any of these expert witnesses. I mean, the judge, oh my goodness. So she talked at length, saying like, oh, and it just drives me insane to think about it. She's a horrible person. She's talking about how 100 people gave letters, testimonials about Ross's character. Right, and how moving it was, and how heavy the burden was on her, and how she never wants to have to judge another person, and she's really getting into this emotive thing about her trials and tribulations of having to judge someone. And then after maybe 15 minutes of going on at length of this and saying, oh, Ross, you clearly don't fit the description of a criminal mastermind. It's really complicated, and you're a very complicated person, and I've had to weigh this against this, and I read this report, and she's citing all of these reports that are about how incarceration rates are through the roof, about how the war on drugs is failing, about how recidivism, is that how you pronounce it, rates are just huge with this sort of incarceration, how it actually creates criminality, how like all of these awful things to do with the justice system. She was saying, oh, and I read this, and I read this. And then after she was done, giving this lovely little disclaimer and preface, she went into the most cold-hearted attack on his character and everything about him, and just saying, like, you are dangerous to the community. Talking about all of these accounts about how he's a callous murderer. She proceeded to bring in 2 family members of victims that have died of drug-related deaths. Now, let's look a little bit about that. So, first of all, I mean, no autopsies were done on these people. So the cause of death isn't actually known, but that's just a technicality. The defense brought up the point of saying, listen, you can't blame Ross for doing something that is. This is
in the closing statements.
This is the closing statements. This is before the sentence was released.
So,
it was so inappropriate. It's so inappropriate. 2 family members of people who died from drug-related overdoses or whatnot were brought in, and you know what? It was heart-wrenching. And so inappropriate to bring them in.
Well, I don't. Is that normally done at a sentence?
No, I mean, I don't even know, but it was disgusting, right? Because my heart goes out for those families.
Right.
And clearly they're going through these awful things. But you know what? The family members then proceeded to talk about Ross and say what a sociopath he was, and what a hardened criminal he was, and what a disgusting person he was, and how he deserves, in their minds, the worst punishment possible. And that is so inappropriate. I'm sorry, but inviting 2 people, I mean, that is exactly why our court system has evolved, so that the victim doesn't decide on the sentence or on the punishment of the criminal, right? Because all this emotion gets involved. And so what does the prosecution do? Bring in these 2 victims to, pull on everyone's emotions and try to seem like this entire farce was justified. And it was awful to hear them talk about Ross that way. Like, I mean, they don't know anything about him. They don't even know if he was, you know, connected to in any way to Silk Road. I mean, they talk about him like he was a murderer. They mention that many times, and that just drives me insane. That everyone is spreading these absolutely malicious rumors about things that Ross has never been charged with. I mean, this is clearly, you know, slandering Ross's name all over the media in order to create some sort of persona around him, darken his image.
Yeah, it's been very frustrating for me the last several days, because of course, you know, now that this is in the news, you know, everybody with a Facebook profile feels entitled to, you know, have a judgment about it.
Yeah.
And many of us have spent probably far too much time trying to correct.
Yeah.
Problems. It's very frustrating because, you know, these sort of armchair adjudicators, you know, around with their Facebook accounts, you know, saying, oh, well, you know, the non-aggression principle, you know, clearly stood in violation of it, and so on. I mean, it's really revolting.
Yeah, I mean, I came out of that trial, and I, as I said, I don't even know how Lynn it felt coming out of there, or how the rest of his family felt coming out of there, but I felt physically ill. I felt like there is no longer anywhere to turn, right? When you have such a blatant miscarriage of justice, and you have a judge citing things that a person has never been charged with, and so far above the law, and not letting the defense, you know, come in to counter any of these claims, the fact that the defense wasn't even allowed to explore the legitimacy of the digital evidence. Every piece of evidence in this trial was digital. Every piece of evidence. Now, I'm sorry, but the precedent that sets now is that digital evidence is admissible in court. And what is wrong with that is that it is so easily corruptible. Now, they took Ross's laptop. It was completely unencrypted. They had complete access to everything on there. And the defense were not even allowed to investigate whether or not the logs in which, you know, these murder-for-hire suggestions were created or placed there or tampered with or any of that. There's absolutely no way to verify this. Now, if the courts were actually interested in having a fair trial, rather than just saying, listen, we found someone, let's do whatever it takes to convict him, let's not let, you know, the defense weasel its way out. Like, if they were actually interested in learning through a trial whether he was guilty or innocent, he should have let them explore all options to make sure that the two incredibly corrupt police officers that were leading the investigation did not plant evidence. I mean, they stole hundreds of millions of dollars from Silk Road. They've already been charged with that. That is the whole reason why these murder for hire charges can't go to court, because it's just so embroiled in corruption at this stage, and yet the judge found it appropriate to bring up those things he has never been charged with in the sentencing.
Well, let's just back up one quick second, because I'm not sure that people entirely understand this, but essentially what you're saying is that the government did not want the murder for hire charges to be part of the trial.
Yeah.
Because the people who made the claims, or at least were at some level embroiled in the chat logs, right, were themselves found guilty of they were like sting operators, you know, who then stole money, right? Yeah.
Well, there's so much corruption involved with the officers, and I mean, what's more is, even if you read the logs, it's such a setup. It's such an unbelievable setup. And who knows how much of the logs were tampered with? Who knows if the logs were real? I mean, there's so much up in the air. And honestly, I think we'd all feel better if that was actually allowed to be explored by the defense.
Well, I think that was just it. I mean, it was the defense that wanted the charges made so that they could be subject to the normal rule of discovery. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's just it's absolutely insane how this whole thing has been.
But tell me, do you know if the murder for hire thing was part of the closing statements of the prosecution?
It was all part of the closing statements, and what's worse is that it was part of the entire speech that the judge gave. I mean, she spent like an hour talking about how he is a danger to society and clearly saw himself as above the law and is callous and is killing people. And I I couldn't handle that. You know, it's just it's so disgusting.
Well, I mean, everybody, we all know the court system is corrupt and it's a terrible bureaucracy and awful, but, I think most of us believe that at some level this is just not an utterly lawless system in the sense that, you can't just do whatever you want. So how do you suppose that this comes about? I mean, I guess I'm just wondering, like how did it happen that you can have a judge cite all these things that he wasn't convicted of?
Right. Well, I mean, so I think that there are a few things at work here, and if anyone hasn't seen the latest film by Alex Winter, Deep Web, you should see it. It's a really good film.
I've not seen that. Is that on at the theater near you?
It was on at the Brooklyn Film Festival, so I saw it on the weekend, but it was also available for streams. So it's probably available somewhere. I think that, I mean, he brought up a good point in that. It's like, I mean, Nixon said that we failed in the war of drugs. This has been failing for 40 years, right? It's not working. And you wonder why it's being perpetuated and why the government is holding up examples of why, drugs are bad and we need to cut them down. And he looks at all of the special interest groups that are entrenched. This isn't just about the government agencies that have been set up and will be completely disenfranchised if the war on drugs stops. This is also about, drug testing companies who have access to people who are in prison, who are coerced to take part in certain tests. Like there are a lot of special interest groups writing on this, and I'm not sure we will see the end of the war on drugs.
You've also got the problem of the drug lords. I always thought that in many ways, the biggest danger the Silk Road faced was not from governments but from drug lords.
Right. Well, I mean, it's just. There's so much more I want to talk about in regards to what happened at the sentencing. Like, she pulled the privilege card.
Talking about his privileges and his educational privileges.
She basically told him to check his privilege. She said how, I mean, they were talking about Dr. X. Now, for those of you who don't know, on the Silk Road payroll was a doctor who actually advised people in regard to drugs and safety and everything. So different parts of logs were read at the hearing, for example, at the sentencing. For example, someone asked, I want to take ecstasy for the first time. I'm type 2 diabetes. Is this going to affect my blood glucose level? I mean, this is the type of stuff that you want to hear from a professional, but you can't ask your doctor. Why? Because it's illegal, right? So they go to these people online, and he was basically told, well, no, it's not going to affect your glucose levels, but you will become forgetful probably, so set your alarm so you remember to take insulin shots. And that sort of stuff, I mean, the judge reacted to that and told Ross how irresponsible he was for allowing someone to come on and do that and encourage the use of drugs. And I think what the judge fails to see is that a person has the capacity for individual choice. And if they're choosing to take ecstasy, they're going to do it regardless. So let's try and ensure that they do it in the most safe way possible. Now, this point also came up when one of the fathers of the victims came up. And this was the victim was a heroin addict. He'd done heroin before. He got back into it. So this was something he was well acquainted with. And our father said, listen, our son had a problem, but he couldn't talk to anyone for help. Let's look at why he couldn't talk to anyone for help. Because heroin is illegal, and he's a criminal for using heroin. Now, this is what we are doing. We are stopping people from having the ability to actually ask for help, to reach out and find out about safety, or to ask for support in this sort of thing. And this is a disgusting system that we're perpetuating here. I mean, the fact that the judge basically said to Ross that you're coming from such a privileged position, you pretend that you're helping people by having someone like Dr. X on the site, but honestly, so much of these drugs are being sold wholesale, and it's really naive of you to think otherwise. So these drugs are going to the street corner and being sold to poor black kids, and you're sitting there in your privileged position thinking that you're doing some good where people are out there dying. And I was just like, oh my God. I mean, there's so many factually incorrect things about that. If you look at the logs, actually, it was one of the DHS agents who really pushed the sale of drugs to larger amounts as well. But I mean, on top of that, telling Ross to check his privilege when she is sitting there on her throne passing judgment on this man that's going to destroy his life forever, talking about how awful it is to have a son ripped away from someone, because of drugs, and here she is ripping someone else's son away from them. I mean, the whole thing was just awful.
She herself she's about 50. I saw she was 51 years old. She seemed to have been appointed by Obama.
Yeah, it was like Chuck Schumer or someone.
Yeah, she seemed to have been something like a commercial litigator who defended large corporate interests in their intellectual property claims. At least that's what her Wikipedia page says. Yeah. So, this is, talk about privilege, right? I mean, yeah, this is, whereas Ross never,
Yeah, they talk about Ross like he's some sort of millionaire, that he's had this privilege his whole life, not actually looking at his background, that he was an entrepreneur who went out there and tried to make the streets a safer place, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, what does it say on his LinkedIn profile? I quoted it on my Facebook. It's just such a brilliant quote where he basically said he wants to use economic forces for good, to decrease the amount of violence in the world, to decrease the,
Naomi, I know this. I corresponded with him before the Silk Road was founded. I mean, I know this about him.
Yeah. And you corresponded with him.
Idealist, and he just wanted to bring peace to the world, and that was the whole thing.
Yeah. You corresponded with him the other day as well on the phone, correct?
Well, I spoke to him, but that was the first contact I had from him since before the Silk Road was founded, where I just had an exchange of emails with him.
Yeah, no,
he's a libertarian idealist.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. It's amazing all the things that were written. And the judge came out and said to him, listen, I've read everything that the defense has provided, and it just shows me how misguided all of you are. What you have said is just wrong. It is incorrect. The war on drugs is working. She kept saying like all these blatantly false things, and she was saying like this ideology that you and your friends, your flag waving friends, cite, it's dangerous. You are, you're dangerous to society. You need to be locked up. I mean, look at this. Like, she gave Ross the absolute maximum ranking for criminal threat to society, the absolute maximum you could possibly get. She also gave him the absolute minimum ranking in terms of criminal history, past criminal history. I mean, this is someone who's never committed a crime before, never come in contact with the law, being like, they're saying like he's the absolute threat to society. And the defense put forward a motion to say, listen, he is such a non-violent person. Everything about him is non-aggression. Can he be downgraded to a medium security prison? And she denied the request. And when she said that, I think there were a lot of people crying with that, because we know what that means. I mean, maximum security prison is so dangerous, and Ross is not a dangerous person. And this is just, this is going to be torture for the rest of his life. Like, I don't even want to say it, but like, the implications are clear on that. Like, say like fleshing out the details of that, it just is awful.
So I mean, how can I ask this? Do you think this is just the malice of one person at work, or do you think that she...
Well, from what I've heard about the ongoing trial, everything the defense came up against, it just seems like it was a tag team the entire way. It seems like this was a showcase. I mean, honestly, like, let's call this what it was, like a Soviet show trial. And I know that they are very vicious words, but that is what this entire experience has been, right? And it feels like everything the defense tried to do to actually give Ross a fair trial, to give him a say, you know, to stand up for himself. They were just handicapped at every turn, and the judge just helped them all along the way. You know, prosecution is objecting every 2 seconds, and the judge is just letting this go on. And everything, you know, every motion that the defense brings up, she denies. Every motion that the prosecution brings up, she accepts. Like, this isn't coincidence here. You know, it's not just like the prosecution was right all the time. Like, there was such an incredible bias going on here. There is no way that this was just like a malicious judge. I feel like this is a show trial. The government needed this to be a warning to other people, right?
A warning against what?
Oh God, against people standing up to government, really. I mean, this is a person who, I mean, that she called him the biggest threat to society because he said that government was his enemy, you know? He said that he wants peace. He said that the drug war isn't working. And she basically said that he is so dangerous to society because of these views that he holds, because he holds himself above the law. No, maybe he just wants to challenge really shitty laws. Is that not what the people have the right to do? Do we not have
to? Well, every entrepreneur, every entrepreneur does exactly this. Yeah. I mean, UPS challenged the post office, you know.
Yeah.
Apple's challenging the old phone companies, and
yeah.
You know, every disrupt. I mean, we live in times where everybody's praising the glories of disruptive, you know, innovation and non-compliance with a vast regulatory machine. So, for her to act as, you know, it's very strange too. I mean, this attitude that, well, Ross, you live on the internet, which you think, you know, it somehow exempts you from democratic mandate. You know, we all live on the internet.
Yeah.
This is the nature of our life.
Mm-hmm.
For to somehow single out this guy as if he was some sort of outlying, you know, rebel, as versus really emblematic of an entire generation of people who are trying to escape the confines of the overly regulated physical world. I mean, Ross, I mean, everybody is Ross at this point in history, you know?
Yeah. I mean, this sets such scary precedents as well, doesn't it? First of all, the fact that digital evidence is now being just taken as it is, and people don't seem to think that we actually need to investigate to find out the legitimacy, the authenticity of this evidence. Second of all, I mean, the whole warrant issue. This is why we fought the revolution, right? You know, Britain was all about just going into people's private spaces, and America said, no, let's actually have specific warrants. And then suddenly 90% of our lives lives on the internet, and the government says, oh, this is a free-for-all. As soon as you put it on the net, that means we can go into not even the net. As soon as this goes in digital form, we have the right to go through every part of your life that's been digitized. That is every part of our lives these days. I mean, it's just insane that now the precedent has been set up that they're allowed to do that. They don't need a specific warrant. I mean, they would need a specific warrant to go into someone's house, right? I mean, what about the files online? It just blows my mind. And I mean, the judge also, I mean, she had two different qualms, right? She first of all said, listen, you had this ideological fight. You were fighting against what you thought was a bad law. First of all, you know, don't hold yourself above the law. The laws are there for a reason. You make society a dangerous place. But then she said, but the fight you're fighting against, you're just wrong. And she said that to him, like, you are wrong. And she cited all the reasons why, you know, Ross's ideology is wrong. And she made this an ideological battle. You know, she brought ideology into this. The defense were not allowed to bring up Ross's ideology at any point in the trial. And she brought it up. And she cherry-picked part of it, and she basically said, you know, you say that government is your enemy. You're clearly trying to bring down society. You are the enemy. You are dangerous. You need to be locked up forever.
That's amazing to think that it was actually a political trial. And I think that's basically what you're saying, which is why I think this whole trial and incident and situation should be of concern to anybody who loves human liberty and aspires more for the world than for it to be run, by gigantic authoritarian states, until the end of time.
Yeah.
And libertarians who think that the Ross Ulbricht trial is of no relevance to them are completely wrong. This is, I've developed a sense over the last 3 days, and I'm going to have a hard time expressing it, that the significance of this trial and the sentencing is probably more substantial than I think anybody's yet realized. Mm-hmm. In terms of it representing a kind of a full-scale frontal attack by the regime, against those who would aspire the world to be a better place, essentially. There's also a funny thing, like the fallout from this is interesting, because we normally think of harsh sentences being designed to sort of deter others, which is a slightly wicked way to think of sentencing. I mean, that shouldn't actually be the idea. I mean, ideally, sentencing would somehow reflect, the demands for justice, not some instrumental desire to deter others. But there's another factor here too, that if the drug warriors and the FBI and the whole architecture of oppression were to seek to recruit others into their ranks in a similar way to these rogue agents that were working for the FBI, now they have a case. They can go up to practically anybody and say, look, we know for a fact you've done some wrong things, and observe what happened to Ross Ulbricht. So you work with us, or you will meet a similar fate. So it creates a very dangerous situation for probably millions of people.
No, it's terrifying.
Yeah,
it's absolutely terrifying. Like, I walked out of that trial, like, just what do we do next? What do we do now? Clearly, the individual no longer has the right to a fair trial. There was no fair trial given to Ross, and that is with a huge amount of support behind him, and they were just flat out denied. And it is terrifying to think what the government is capable of, how invasive they are in our private lives, and what's going to happen next. It's terrifying.
Who attended the sentencing hearing? Why were there so many people? Was it all media, or just people who are interested in human rights? And
I think that there are a lot of people who felt very strongly about this case. This was very important to a lot of people. It's important to people, anyone who believes in individual rights. It's important to believe, to anyone who believes that the incarceration rate in this country is disgusting, and that the war on drugs isn't working, and we need to do something to change it. And it's important for anyone who's interested in the digital sphere, right? Because this case just sets ridiculous precedents. I also feel that, so many people were hanging on every word of this trial. Sarah Jong did an amazing job covering it as well, talking about what happened each day. And where
was this? I'm not sure I saw these reports. Where were they?
I mean, she wrote them in Forbes, basically outlining what happened each day at the trial. And I think people were really looking at these reports and seeing what a miscarriage of justice it was all along the way. Now, the defense couldn't really talk about the miscarriage of justice until the sentencing was carried out, because up until then there was still a glimmer of hope that perhaps they could get through to the judge.
This was a problem for the defense, right? Because they tried their best to play nice, as much as possible, in hopes of some leniency for Ross.
Basically, I mean, the defense's plan was to, through a line of questioning with certain witnesses, to bring out the storyline that outlined that there was so much, corruption associated with this, that you can't trust the authenticity of digital evidence. I mean, if this trial was actually to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Ross Ulbricht was guilty, there was so much doubt. This was not proven beyond a reasonable doubt. This case was riddled with doubt. And you know what? All of that doubt was washed away with this implication of murder for hire that was never actually charged, just referenced to, alluded to.
Do you think that affected the jury? Because it comes out in the...
I mean, I've been tweeting about this all weekend. It's like when someone is so powerless, what do? Well, you go straight to the communications website. You just try to network with people to try and see what sort of support network is out there. So I just been like tweeting and trying to wrap my head around this. And I was getting these idiots just reply to me saying, like, Ross Ulbricht is no hero. He, killed 6 people. And it's like, I don't even know what to say to that. There's only so many times I can tell someone to actually do some research before they start accusing people of things, right? We're innocent until proven guilty. Has Ross actually been charged with any of these crimes? No. We've got to wonder why.
There wasn't even any crime. I mean, there was never any bodies. There was nothing at all.
I mean, I'll bring up a very controversial analogy, and people may hate me for this, but honestly, this is an analogy that makes sense to me. Let's say that let's say that there were Ross did try to get people killed. Let's actually look at the context around that, right? Now, I'm not saying he did. I don't believe he did. I believe that the evidence was incredibly corrupt and that we can't trust any of it. But if he did, I would not blame him, because this would be like someone blackmailing Schindler and saying, hey, give us your list. Give us the list of all of these Jewish people that these families are hiding. This is like the family next door going to their next door neighbor and saying, hey, I know you're hiding a huge family of Jews, and we're going to tell the authorities, and they're going to come and they're going to kill every single Jew in here. What would you do? I mean, would you err on the side of right or wrong? Because it is wrong. It is wrong to take an action that you know is going to get a huge amount of people killed. And for the next door neighbor to come along and say, listen, I know you're hiding Jews, and I'm going to tell the authorities, and I'm going to get all of you killed. Yeah, I'd probably take out a hit on them too, and this is for the internet to hear that is how I feel about this, because I do not believe in blackmail. I do not believe in blackmailing where people's lives are in danger, and that is exactly what we're dealing with. We are dealing with thousands of lives that matter, and the fact that incarceration is just so incredibly damaging to society as a whole, in particular to poorer communities. It is just entrenching this cycle of poverty. It's disgusting. Like, if these hits actually happened, I'm not sure that I would be entirely against them. That being said, I don't believe that they did. And the reason I believe that is because it was never brought to trial, because the prosecution knew that they did not have the evidence to substantiate it. So what did they do? They felt good enough to take all of that information to the media, but did not feel that it was strong enough to take to court. Now, what does that tell you? That says that they were just planning on slandering his name, and it's disgusting. And honestly, the media shouldn't buy into that. The media should be reporting what Ross actually was charged with, not having these headlines that say, Ross Ulbricht hired all these people to get murdered. I mean, no, let's presume that he is innocent, and let's actually see what the prosecution brought to trial.
Can I ask you, I mean, we all are, I mean, one of the things that's been just so devastating about this whole thing for all of us is that all along we all, held out some hope, and then suddenly, there was no hope at all, right? Mm-hmm. What are the chances that what are the chances that the be an appeal of this, or is that just absurd?
Well, say that again.
What are the chances of an appeal?
So they are taking it to appeal. They're appealing this. I hope that it's successful. Honestly, I think that there was such a blatant miscarriage of justice that it needs to be successful in appeal. If you look at...
Yeah, of course. But I mean, what it seems like, if you're right that this was not just the sort of the malice of one judge, that there seems to be a sort of a system-wide, sort of...
But are all people in the system on the same side? You know, I'm sure that there are people out there who very much disagree with the war on drugs, and there are. The defense actually cited some of these people and said it is not consistent that everyone believes that this is a good thing. People have actively spoken out about this. Judges have spoken out about this. Now, was it just luck that the Ross Ulbricht trial got allocated a judge who is so outspoken in favor of the war on drugs? I mean, it seems like it was planned that way, right?
Let me ask, how much do you know about, I'm sorry to sort of keep pressing on this, but I mean, what are the actual chances that an appeal could has any hope of success at all? Do you have any read of that?
I don't know. I maybe I'm a hopeless optimist, but I honestly believe that at the very least, this would lessen Ross's charge. And I believe that because what he was charged with, the kingpin charge on top of like the internet espionage charge, I mean, no one would ever associate the running of Silk Road with any sort of espionage charge. It's just, that's just so completely disparate. The fact that they were all lumped together and charged against him is actually insane. The kingpin charge, being charged with running like an ongoing criminal enterprise, is actually insane. You know, he hosted a website. Like, I mean, it's just, all of this is blown so far out of proportion. If you look at rapists, they get 8 years, right? Eight years. So we need to actually look at other drug-related crimes and what they're charged with compared to what Ross got, which was, 2 life sentences plus 35 years plus $185 million or so, however much it was. It's actually insane. So I honestly think that they're going to look at this sentencing and say, yeah, this is entirely out of line.
Who is when you say they? Who is they?
Well, I hope whoever they appeal to. I mean, that's all we can do at this point. I'm not going to discourage anyone for believing in the hope of the trial, because I know that the Ulbricht family desperately need people's help to actually finance this. So again, like, if anyone wants to go to freeross.org and donate money to the appeal, this is the way to take a stand. This is like the last bastion of hope here. I believe that it's going to be fruitful in some respect. But the only way it is if they can actually pay to make it go forward. So
it's fascinating to me because we've all written about these issues, for some of us for a very long time, and about the corruption of the state and the system and the wrongness of the laws and just how everything's sort of stacked up against the common person and so on. But there's something that happens to, and you read about it in history. I mean, you read about Socrates, you read about the burning of witches and the killing of escaped slaves and so on, and we read about Martin Luther King standing up against illegitimate laws and how he was spied upon and ultimately murdered and so on. But it's just very interesting to me, at least for me personally, to see the effects that it had on me to see this whole thing unfold in our own time. I mean, more than any sort of individual miscarriage of justice that I can ever remember.
Yeah,
this one seems to have personalized and brought home, the reality of just how the personal and moral consequences of sort of this despotism. Like few things else I can ever remember. At least for me personally, it's had that effect,
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people have been arguing with me the past few days saying, well, he seems like an okay guy, but he did break the law, and so he needs to be punished.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Oh, God, and it drives me insane. So, and they say, well, he should appeal as part of the system. That's what the system's there for.
It's very interesting.
What if the system is incredibly corrupt? What if there is no recourse for you? What if the system itself is against you, right? What about that slave owner?
The law is egregiously wrong. If you're a hotel owner in 1952 in Knoxville, Tennessee, and you allow a black family to stay there, and you get prosecuted by the local government for being in violation of the segregation codes.
Exactly.
Are you going to be tweeting out, wow?
Yeah, so let's actually look at someone who worked within the system. What was his name? The case where that slave fled. He finally escaped. He got to the north and was like, "Woohoo, I'm free!" and started a family. And then the owners came back to reclaim him, and they took it to the high court. Right? They took it to them, and the court said, "Oh, sorry. we don't recognize your claim to announce yourself free because you are property and you are private property and you are this person's private property, and send him back. He escaped and they sent him back. The court sent him back. The government sent him back. That is what happens when you work within the system. Sometimes the system isn't good enough to handle these things. Sometimes you need people to go outside the system to actually create a system that enables freedom, like Ross did.
This is the whole history of progress, Naomi. I mean, from the ancient world to the present, it's been a matter of going outside of deeply corrupt laws. You know? Laws against heresy, against freeing slaves.
I mean, that is why I'm so excited about technologies like the blockchain, like Bitcoin. That's why I love peer-to-peer technologies. That's why Silk Road was amazing. But you know what? Silk Road had a big flaw. It was centralized. Look at Open Bazaar. I mean, that's exciting if they can make it work. A decentralized black market. Let's enable people to actually be free and outside of this horrendous war on drugs in a way that can't be shut down by government.
What's also striking about this, and I'm sure the judge knows this, I mean, the shutdown of Silk Road, of course, from the drug warrior point of view, you know, accomplished absolutely nothing. You know, The Economist magazine ran an article where they did their best estimate of dark web peer-to-peer drug exchanges, and they're running, you know, 4 and 5 times what they were in Silk Road 1. Not to mention the fact, you know, and I visited the Silk Road, I think, let me think back about it. I think it was Silk Road 1 I visited. And the thing that struck me, and this would have been a few years ago, right? That it was pretty clear that the main product people were buying was marijuana.
Yeah.
And in the intervening years, between when I first visited the site and today, marijuana is legal in many parts of the country, and is increasingly, where it's not legal, just completely overlooked as being, you know, just a minor thing. And so the law has already changed. Like as far as I can tell, you know, that was the main product sold on the Silk Road.
Well, I mean,
already since that time, the laws have been liberalized.
Yeah, I would even be careful with that. Like, I think that certain states are getting smart, but the federal government of America is dangerous. It is dangerous. The states, there are some great states in America. The federal government is dangerous. And it doesn't matter whether or not a state has legalized marijuana, it is still illegal in the United States. The federal government has effectively said, oh, we're going to choose not to prosecute, you know, do your thing, but next government we might, or soon we might change our mind. The threat is always there. And what makes it worse is that marijuana is listed as a Schedule I drug. You know, cocaine isn't even listed as a Schedule I drug, and yet you know, marijuana is so inherently evil that it has been listed as the Schedule I drug that is so too dangerous to be able to enable any sort of medical testing with. That is so dangerous that if someone gets caught smoking a joint, they get sent to jail for, is it like 10 or 20-year mandatory minimum? It's just absolutely insane. It's great that the states are moving in that direction, but we have a long way to go, and I think that the only way we're going to get the message across is for people to actually start petitioning federal government and saying, you know, we won't stand for this. This is not good enough that you're choosing not to prosecute marijuana. You need to actually abolish these laws.
Yeah.
It's just not going, it's not enough that they're handing us their scraps and say, here, you know, here's some nice little scraps for you, just to keep you wanting more. It's just not good enough anymore, and we need to be fighting this.
Another product that became very commonly sold on the Silk Road were prescription drugs that were legal, that are legal in Canada and Mexico, but had yet to be approved through the FDA. That was another thing that people. So you know, these are drugs that are like drugs for rare diseases, you know, and you know, experimental drugs that were, you know, helping people's lives.
Yeah.
That are used commonly in Canada and Mexico, but just were otherwise not available in the U.S.
Yeah.
And they were available through the Silk Road.
And it brings up the right to try, doesn't it? The fact that the government has made it illegal for you to try any drugs that are not approved by the FDA. Now, what the right to try movement is doing is petitioning, like, if you have a terminal illness, if you are going to die anyway, then do not make it illegal for these people. Like, do not send them to jail or prosecute them for trying these drugs, which may or may not save their life. Give them the right to try. And even that is just not going far enough. We should be looking at individual responsibility. People should know that, if the FDA doesn't approve something, then it's risky to take it, right? They should be able to balance that risk on their own and to judge whether or not the risk is worth it. If you have a terminal illness, yeah, the risk is probably worth it. The fact that it's illegal to try these, even for those people, is absolutely insane.
Let me ask you something else, Naomi, about what you think the fallout of this is ultimately. The way you're sort of detailing just the amount of prosecutorial abuse and the bias of the court, and there's so many outrages along the way, and the citation of wrongdoings that were never actually part of the trial and so on. Do you expect that there'll be a growing number of sort of investigative journalists and writers and others who will be interested in the case that can help reveal some of this? Do you think that the case is significant enough to attract, some major journalistic interest?
So I think that more needs to be done on the media front in favor of the case. I think that the Ulbrichts have been doing an incredible job, and that's all they've been doing. They've been trying to combat this incredible negative media bias against Silk Road, against drugs, all of that. But they seem to be one of the very few people, very few families fighting this, right? I think a lot more needs to be done to get the word out there that this is not a war that we should be fighting and that we are destroying lives. I mean, that judge read out a sentence that effectively destroyed the life of an incredibly promising man who would have continued to contribute huge amounts to society. I believe he already did. Silk Road is phenomenal. It was proven, studies have come out that proved that it actually took violence away from the streets. Now, I'm not someone who takes drugs. I don't really like drugs. I think other people should do whatever they want with their bodies, and I'm thankful to people like Ross for making the streets a safer place for me. It's just common sense. Like, one thing that also just made me so incensed was the judge just cherry picked what she chose to believe from Ross Ulbricht, right? Ross gave a testimonial and said, listen, this is what I believe, I'm remorseful, all of these things. And the judge said, yeah, no, I don't believe you. I just don't buy it. I just don't know you well enough. So I'm just going to take it at face value, like the crimes in front of me. Now, what she was effectively saying was, I'm choosing to take at face value these logs that you apparently wrote and judge that as higher than what you're actually physically telling me here. These logs, which may or may not have been corrupted, these logs which should have absolutely no more value than you standing here right now, talking to me. And instead she said, no, I'm just going to cherry pick what I believe from you. And this one I believe, this one I don't. Ross, all the way through, everything that he wrote, or everything DPR wrote anyway, basically revolved around, this is an economic experiment. This is to make the world a safer place. This is to reduce violence. This is to help people so they don't get incarcerated. All of these things. And the judge literally said, no, I don't believe that was it. I believe you were motivated by greed. I believe that you were motivated by, this tremendous profit. Look at the amount of money that went through Silk Road. Let's ignore the fact that it all didn't go to him, that it was a bunch of people. It's just like, oh, well, you got a cut of it. You were clearly only motivated by greed. And she literally said that. Now, I'm sorry, who is she to judge out of all of these things and cherry pick what she does and doesn't believe? Like, it was just so disgusting. It was awful. Are you speechless, Jeffrey?
Yeah. Well, it's a kind of situation that combines all the things I love with all the things I hate, and smashes them all into one, deeply unfortunate end. And I guess I'm like you, Naomi. People call me an optimist. I never set out to be an optimist. I don't.
Mm.
I don't. I don't define myself that way. I don't think, oh, let's find the silver lining in everything as a matter of principle and a marketing gimmick or whatever. That's just not who I am. What I actually find is that people are very disinclined to see the hopeful signs of hope and evidence of hope all around us,
Yeah.
And the more sort of despairing and dreadful a situation looks, the more I think it falls to us to find, in a sense,
Mm-hmm.
possible rays of hope and things out of this.
Yeah.
So
it's all we've got, Jeffrey.
Yeah.
When the world looks dark, you can either say, all right, I give up now, or you can say, the world looks dark, so what can we do?
Yeah.
Right.
And I don't know, I don't know what this hope looks like in this case, I guess is what, but I know it's there.
Yeah.
And this is why I keep sort of pressing around the edges with you. Like, well, are the journalists interested in covering this in a detailed way, which I can't and won't. I mean, I can write, poetic tributes all day, but I'll never be able to write a definitive piece that somehow, shakes the legal system, But there are those who can do it, and might.
Yeah.
But, let me cite one historical precedent here, actually. And then we really need, in fact, let me just reduce this, rather than just going on about this, I'll just reduce it. I think about the case of Oscar Wilde. So this was a case of England's greatest literary mind of the 19th century, arguably, was charged with indecency and convicted and jailed.
Yeah.
And then sent into exile and lived an impoverished life of a beggar until he was dead at something like the age of, I forget now, but he's very young. He was about 43 or something.
Alan Turing, right?
Alan Turing's another case. But what happened actually in the case of Oscar Wilde is that immediately after the trial, it's really true that the whole nation was saying, oh, we thought he was a wonderful playwright. It turns out he's a disgusting pervert and a loathsome person, and down with this guy. But, Naomi, within a few years, everything shifted completely, to the point that just a few years later, the same people who were saying stone him, exile him, good that England's gotten rid of this loathsome person, suddenly all of England looked inward and said, what were we thinking? This was dreadful. And it was, and there was a complete repeal of the laws under which he was prosecuted, actually. And it began this process of liberalization. Now, the Turing case was interesting because you've got the same country, but there had been a reaction back the other way. But basically, during the interwar period, England had adopted extremely liberal laws regarding homosexuality.
Right.
In response to a kind of a sort of a nationwide sense of profound regret for what they had done to this great man. I mean, the same thing happened in the ancient world after the death of Socrates and so on. So, this is why something tells me that this case is something of a watershed, and yet that does not take away the terrible reality, that I think we have to face here. And this is a terrible consequence for one man, and
whether he's the person who creates the precedent that loosens up society and makes them more rational, it still doesn't take away from the fact that this is a tragedy, an absolute tragedy. You know what I had a dream about last night, Jeffrey? I had a dream that I was involved in a prison break with Ross Ulbricht, that we got a group of people together and we were on a ship. I don't know why we were on a ship, but somehow he was being shipped to this prison island, and so a group of us got together and we broke him out. And I can tell you, I was so happy in that dream. I felt empowered, and I haven't felt empowered for the last few days. I have felt defeated. I felt crushed and powerless. But in that dream, I felt empowered. And I think what we need to do is just look at ways to get back our power, give power back to the people through, technology, through just like believing that the people are inherently good, so let's fight for what's good, and let's just not lie down and take it, right?
And let's not let injustices stay. Let's not. I mean, there's always hope, and I'm going to look forward to seeing how it plays itself out, to find and discover the most likely unexpected sources of hope, and even growing out of this one case.
Yeah.
Naomi, we are bumping up against the next show. Just in case people don't understand what's about to happen, is that Tatiana is actually interviewing Lynn Ulbricht. And I think we should all watch.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. And thanks everyone for coming and joining in the conversation. This is such an important issue. So see you all on the next video.
Goodbye, Naomi.
And so the no evidence probably exists for this. And the fact that she used that in describing in creating the sentence, it was beyond me. I mean, it started off, I feel like the murmurs in the crowd really started when she started reading through some of the things that he did, right? It started when she started talking about how many drugs passed through Silk Road, and then when she said that he was being directly linked to all of these, she was counting it as if he had directly sold all of these drugs.
Do you think she understood that wasn't true? I mean,
I think, you know what, I think she understood exactly what she was doing, and I think that there were some really underhanded things going on with this. And the reason I say that is because at every stage of the trial, the defense were handicapped. The fact that a week before trial, the defense had thousands and thousands and thousands of extra pages popped on their desk that the prosecution was going to take to court. They had like such limited time to go through it all. The fact that they tried to bring in expert witnesses to actually describe the technology and why multiple moderators could have had access at any time to all of these things, and how you couldn't actually link a single person to any of these things. I mean, they denied their request for any of these any of these expert witnesses. I mean, the judge, oh my goodness. So she talked at length, saying like, oh, and it just drives me insane to think about it. She's a horrible person. She's talking about how 100 people gave letters, testimonials about Ross's character. Right, and how moving it was, and how heavy the burden was on her, and how she never wants to have to judge another person, and she's really getting into this emotive thing about her trials and tribulations of having to judge someone. And then after maybe 15 minutes of going on at length of this and saying, oh, Ross, you clearly don't fit the description of a criminal mastermind. It's really complicated, and you're a very complicated person, and I've had to weigh this against this, and I read this report, and she's citing all of these reports that are about how incarceration rates are through the roof, about how the war on drugs is failing, about how recidivism, is that how you pronounce it, rates are just huge with this sort of incarceration, how it actually creates criminality, how all of these awful things to do with the justice system. She was saying, oh, and I read this, and I read this. And then after she was done, giving this lovely little disclaimer and preface, she went into the most cold-hearted attack on his character and everything about him, and just saying, you are dangerous to the community. Talking about all of these accounts about how he's a callous murderer. She proceeded to bring in 2 family members of victims that have died of drug-related deaths. Now, let's look a little bit about that. So, first of all, I mean, no autopsies were done on these people. So the cause of death isn't actually known, but that's just a technicality. The defense brought up the point of saying, listen, you can't blame Ross for doing something that is. This is
in the closing statements.
This is the closing statements. This is before the sentence was released.
So,
it was so inappropriate. It's so inappropriate. 2 family members of people who died from drug-related like overdoses or whatnot, were brought in. And you know what? It was heart-wrenching. And so inappropriate to bring them in.
Well, I don't. Is that normally done at a
No,
sentence?
I mean, I don't even know, but it was disgusting,
trial.
right? Because my heart goes out for those families.
Right.
And clearly they're going through these awful things. But you know what? The family members then proceeded to talk about Ross and say what a sociopath he was, and what a hardened criminal he was, and what a disgusting person he was, and how he deserves, in their mind, the worst punishment possible. And that is so inappropriate. I'm sorry, but inviting two people, I mean, that is exactly why our court system has evolved, so that the victim doesn't decide on the sentence or on the punishment of the criminal, right? Because all this emotion gets involved. And so what does the prosecution do? Bring in these two victims to, pull on everyone's emotions and try to seem like this entire farce was justified. And it was awful to hear them talk about Ross that way. I mean, they don't know anything about him. They don't even know if he was, connected to in any way to Silk Road. I mean, they talk about him like he was a murderer. They mention that many times, and that just drives me insane. That everyone is spreading these absolutely malicious rumors about things that Ross has never been charged with. I mean, this is clearly slandering Ross's name all over the media in order to create some sort of persona around him, darken his image.
Yeah, it's been very frustrating for me the last several days because of course, now that this is in the news, everybody with a Facebook profile feels entitled to have a judgment about it.
Yeah.
And many of us have spent probably far too much time trying to correct.
Yeah.
Problems. It's very frustrating because, these sort of armchair adjudicators, around with their Facebook accounts, saying, oh, well, the non-aggression principle, clearly stood in violation of it, and so on. I mean, it's really revolting.
Yeah. I mean, I came out of that trial, and I, as I said, I don't even know how Lynn it felt coming out of there, or how the rest of his family felt coming out of there, but I felt physically ill. I felt like there is no longer anywhere to turn, right? When you have such a blatant miscarriage of justice, and you have a judge citing things that a person has never been charged with, and so far above the law, and not letting the defense, come in to counter any of these claims, the fact that the defense wasn't even allowed to explore the legitimacy of the digital evidence. Every piece of evidence in this trial was digital. Every piece of evidence. Now, I'm sorry, but the precedent that sets now is that digital evidence is admissible in court. And what is wrong with that is that it is so easily corruptible. Now, they took Ross, and then for the actual sentencing, I was in the courtroom, and I mean, we'll get into all of what happened at the sentencing in a second, but I just wanted to say my heart goes out for the entire Ulbricht family. This was a horrendous miscarriage of justice that we all witnessed on Friday. So.
I had some, it's been a tough several days for all of us, I think, at many levels in many ways. I think you experienced the trauma about as closely as anybody could. I obviously wasn't there, but it's kept me up at night.
Yeah.
I can't seem to find the right words. I found myself only able to take the news in little small doses. I didn't read Ross's letter to the judge until today, actually, because I just sometimes I avoid things I don't want to look at, and that's sort of how I felt about that. And I found it to be a beautifully touching and inspiring, beautiful, extraordinary.
Yeah. So let's start with the judge's impression of that letter, where she basically called it a horrible display of arrogance. I have so many things that I want to say about this judge. Like, my goodness, Ross is standing there in front of her, begging for his life, and in tears, absolutely distraught because he knows what's ahead of him. And I have never witnessed anything as vicious as what I saw in the judge in addressing Ross,
Really?
Talking about this letter that he wrote, how arrogant he is, how he clearly holds himself above the law, how he clearly has no regard for other people, how he's this callous, malicious person. There were all these ad hominem attacks. What was worse than the ad hominem attacks, though, was a judge using uncharged crimes when determining what sort of a sentence to give someone. And that's really what it comes down to. The fact that Ross has never been indicted for any murder charge. And you cannot use information that is not brought to trial, that clearly they did not have enough evidence to bring to trial because the two leading investigators in this whole case were incredibly corrupt. So
We're live, Naomi.
I think we are live.
Welcome you. Who's going to be? We don't really have leaders and followers in our little world.
I mean, this is an anarchic community here, so we did not ordain any higher power with those sorts of privileges.
Should I introduce you and you introduce me?
Sure, sounds wonderful. Well, I'm here with the wonderful Jeffrey Tucker, who needs absolutely no introduction because he's incredible. You guys, I'm sure you've all read his latest piece about the Ross Ulbricht sentencing, which is why we're here tonight to talk about that. So, Jeffrey, your words are just beautiful, and they really sum up the humongous issue that we're facing right now, which is the people against the government. That's essentially what this is. I will let you go ahead and introduce me if you.
No, I just want to note the fact that you chose to go first, even though we didn't really have a democratic election.
Spontaneous order. That's
okay. Yeah, spontaneous leadership, right? So I'm here with the beautiful and impossibly charming Naomi Brockwell, who's at the Moving Picture Institute, and yourself, a wonderful personality and intellectual force. And I think that you've had a very special interest in the Ross Ulbricht case. Didn't you actually? Were you involved in the trial at any level? Remember, did you attend?
Yeah. So I was at the sentencing the other day, and it was unbelievably traumatic for everyone there. And I know that everyone has really felt the pain of this whole issue because we're just seeing the defense be handicapped at every stage of this trial. And then the sentencing really brought home to me the humongous problem that we're facing right now. Being there in the courtroom when the sentence was pronounced, it was unbelievable. So the courtroom was packed, and then they had two overflow rooms as well, two separate rooms that were filled with people. I was in one of the overflow rooms for the first part, and through the whole thing, like everything the judge was saying, there were just audible gasps through the whole way through.